Buonasera, good evening. Sono Hanru, direttore artistico del Museo Maxi. Siamo molto contenti stasera di avere Isaac Julien con noi. I'm going to speak in English with Isaac this evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy that to be talking with Isaac Julien this evening about his project at the Maxi. And Isaac Julien now finds himself in California, very far away, but also very close to us. Recently, he has a fantastic exhibition at the Maxi. It's called The Marvelous Entanglement about Lina Bo Bardi. And we are going to present a short passage of the film with some installation views, and then we go to the discussion with Isaac about this project. Can we have the image, please? While we are waiting, I would like to just simply introduce Isaac to our public. For those who have not heard of Isaac Julien, I think there are very, very few people who have never heard of Isaac Julien, and he's one of the most important contemporary artists working very much with film and filmmaking and film installations, of course, among many other practices. So we are going to talk about his work a bit later when we look at, I think we are going to look at the, some images of his work at the moment at the Maxi first. Thank you. Can we have the image, please? Apparently there's some technical situation, but that's fine. I would just, maybe give a very short introduction to Isaac again. And Isaac, it's normally based in London, but I think for the last few seasons, he has been traveling between California and London, who actually is teaching with his partner, Mark. Sorry. Mike Nasher, the fantastic curator and film critic, together teaching at California University, Santa Cruz, sorry. Has Isaac Julien film lab, which is very, very important. And in the meantime, he has been very active for the last, I think, 3 decades, let's say, at least, as a filmmaker, as also a very active kind of thinker in terms of, the question of post-colonial culture and social challenges, and also, the question of globalization, capitalism, and very much also into the dialogues between art and architecture in different cultures. And the project that he's now actually showing at the Maxi, it's about Lina Bo Bardi, a fantastic Italian woman architect migrated to Brazil and has created some of the most extraordinary buildings of the 20th century, with incredible provocative thinking in terms of challenging the canons of modernist architecture. And on the way, it's a whole discussion about the confrontations between different philosophies, different values of different cultures, which is very, very important also for today's discussion on how globalization changing our way of thinking, our way of living, and our way of making space. And so here are some installation views of Isaac's project at Maxi at the moment, which extremely beautiful. I guess Isaac didn't really see the installation himself because of the COVID lockdown, and he could not travel to the museum. But his team was working with our team together with the to realize this very, very ambitious project. And this project was shown in a gallery in London before, but it's the first time it is shown in a public museum, and before the travels to other international museums. And of course, we are coming back to the discussion a bit later, but I would like to say there's also a very site-specific reconfiguration of the project in dialogue with another woman architect, Zaha Hadid, who designed the Maxi. Maybe we can continue with the images.
Yes, I want to say, Hanru, that it was such a great honor to be able to show this work and to be in dialogue with Zaha Hadid and, wonderful architect who designed an amazing building, and then to have this conversation with original Roman Lina Bo Bardi and her contribution to architecture in terms of Latin America, and in particular, of course, Brasilia. In terms of Brazilian modernism, she's really, in a way, along with Oscar Niemeyer, have been at the forefront, really, of challenging and changing ways of thinking about architecture and museums. And this image here, which is the same as the image behind me, yes, is where I first met and encountered Lina Bo Bardi's work in 1996. Where I was in Bahia, and I visited the Museum of Modern Art there and came across this amazing staircase. Little did I know that in the 21st century that this would become a sort of iconic motif that would, in a way, become a signature work in my own work, so to speak, representing Lina Bo Bardi's work. And yes. I guess, yeah. And so the opportunity to be able to sort of show this work and then to have this conversation, both between Zaha Hadid and also with Bo Bardi, was a marvelous entanglement.
Yeah.
Of the fruition, a vision of these two giants of architecture. Who are women, coming together. So it's such a fantastic marriage, really, I think. And although I haven't been fortunate enough to see the exhibition, I have to say that I really have to congratulate you and your Maxi team and my studio,
yes.
Marcia and Manon, who were able to help and install the work with Tom Cullen and the Pro Arte V team into this wonderful scenography, and I think the question of scenography is what's so central in relationship to the very special scenographic design that you have in Maxi. I'm sure it's always a challenge, every exhibition.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually in this dialogue, also our curator, Luigia Lonadelli, and also our designer, Dolores Lettieri, have really played a very interesting role, very did a fantastic contribution with the Isaac's team, which is also an incredibly multicultural team, coming from London to work with us during weeks and really reinvent this project to make it into a, I would say, organically integrated into the building, which is also somehow reflecting the how to say, the philosophy of both Zaha Hadid and Lina Bo Bardi, which is challenging not only the question of a traditional modernist museum building, but also architecture in general, the question of time and space. Using Lina Bo Bardi's idea is she said as let's say the main message that Isaac wanted to tell us through the film is time is not linear. It's a marvelous entanglement, and I think this is extremely provocative and beautiful.
Well, I think the thing that's really exciting, and I'm so glad that perhaps the exhibition will be extended, because I must come to Rome and see it.
Yeah, absolutely. We are very much looking forward to seeing you here, and maybe dancing with Lina Bo Bardi together, because there's some very beautiful dancing images, some beautiful scenes of music and dance in this beautiful installation.
Yeah, I know it's a bit like the colliding of these two modernisms, you could say. Zaha may not like the title of being a postmodern architect, but I think she is. But I think, with the way that we're behind the exhibition, utilizing many of Lina Bo Bardi's motifs, like the plinths, where the screens rest, the way that we try to use color in the exhibition, and the experiment to work also with the wallpaper photographic montage, which were exquisitely executed, by your team, also with the help of the magician Paul Ingram, who I work with in London. All of these things came together in this wonderful scenographic choreography. And I guess, in a way, one of the things in the work for me, because actually I lived in Rome for several months, courtesy of the American Academy, where we went to the architectural school that Lina Bo Bardi studied at. We went to her home where she lived, and we followed all of Lina Bo Bardi's footsteps as an art student during our time in Rome, because I felt it was really important to understand why would she say something like to the effect that she detests ruins.
Yeah.
I believe it's because of her sort of ambivalence about ruins, because she could take ruins for granted, that when she encountered Brazil and the culture of Brazil, and the fact that she went to Brazil to build, she knew that she'd never have a chance to build museums or buildings. With Pietro Bardi, her husband, who was a museum director, who perhaps needed to move out of Italy because of his associations. Nonetheless, in Brazil, they created this sort of, if you like, Italian, Brazilian culture. And it was because of her love of design and the admiration for craftsmanship, which of course Italian designers know well, that she could see within the indigenous population and in a way the Black Brazilian populations, all of these cultures which would be seen to be very important aspects of an organic Brazilian culture. And so she brought these two things together, which I think is extraordinary. She brought the organic Brazilian culture, the Afro-Brazilian cultures, their ideas around design and culture, into a kind of fusion with an Italian sensibility around design. And I think this is where you get this extraordinary kind of intervention that she made in Brazilian culture, which I think is very unique. And so I was very drawn by that. And I was also obviously wanted to see how could we make a work that would create the sensation of her buildings, not a encyclopedic documentary, but how could we fill those buildings? And I was very lucky to have the opportunity to have an exhibition in Seschi Pompeia in 2012, I think it was, where basically I was invited to show some of my works, and Solange Farkas, who runs Video Brazil, invited me to do this exhibition, and I came into contact with an architect, Andre, who had worked with Lina Bo Bardi, and I could see he started to design the kind of scenography for my show using all of these Lina Bo Bardi motifs, and that's when I began to think, wow, this would be so. That's why I became fascinated by all things Lina Bo Bardi, and the obsession with Bo Bardi started.
Yeah. Here we can see the timeline of your research, actually starting from 1996.
I have to say that's so brilliantly done in the museum. You know,
yeah,
I want to see a book now.
Yeah, it's a very, very nice, presentation of these. And tell me what attracts you to Brazil. Of course, you were invited by our friend Hanru to a show, but in the meantime,
also, Lina Bo Bardi mania, you could say.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Hanru, as you know, is always in the front guard, and he basically curated a wonderful exhibition called The Insides on the Outsides, or something like that.
Yeah.
Basically, Ulissa Eliasson and Catherine Evans, lots of artists, Gilbert and George, all came to make works in the house, and I did this kind of Fluxus poster called The Ghost of Lina Bo Bardi, and that was my contribution. So it was a very kind of, it was a very subtle contribution.
Yes.
But later on, I made this work called Stones Against Diamonds. I was commissioned by Rolls-Royce, and I was working with Lina Bo Bardi's motif, where she puts paintings onto crystal glass easels and concrete plinths. You can see here in the image, and I replicated the kind of scenography using flat screens and filmed in Iceland, and inserted some glass plinths into an ice cave. I guess you could say it's a bit wacky because it didn't have so much to do with Brazilian culture, but I was very much enchanted by a wonderful letter that Lina Bo Bardi wrote to her husband, where she said she preferred rough cut stones as opposed to polished diamonds. And I think that motif of like having a kind of visceral and maybe rough quality is one of the signature aspects of her work. And then, of course, we have an image here of of the Museum of Modern Art in Bahia, which is where I first saw these stairs, which are behind me, where she had made this sort of conservation. And in a way, I would say, kind of after that exhibition at Seschi Pompeia, that's when I decided that I wanted to make a work about Lina Bo Bardi. Of course, I was, following her footsteps for quite some time before I'd be able to make that work.
Yeah, I remember you also came to the Maxi to do research when we had the Lina Bo Bardi exhibition, which was about
exhibition. It was
which was about her life before going to Brazil. Yeah, her work before going. Yeah, and there was already, I think, a conversation and also a first idea to connect this project with the Maxi building. I guess it was somehow started from this opportunity.
Yes, it is a dream come true. It's a dream come true to show the work
So we are also extremely happy, very proud to be the first museum to show this work as a public museum. And
Lina Bo Bardi would have loved it. I think she would have loved it.
Absolutely, because I think there is some, not only the form of the architecture can enter into dialogue, that she loves curves and Zahadi's building curves, and also in terms of museology, kind of understanding of the way how artwork should be displayed in the museum. I think she has this incredible idea, number one, to make a museum which is flying over a public plaza, a bit like the idea of the Maxi being a museum that connected to the street, to the plaza of the city. Well, different communities would meet, right? Almost like a kind of I would say a public forum. And on the other hand, also in terms of the technique of showing artworks, she invented this incredible display structures that are transparent walls, let's say, or panels, in which you can go around, not only see on one side of the painting, the front side of the painting, also you can see the back side. And that, it was, I would say, not only showing the secret of the painters, how the paintings were cheated behind and signed and so on, but also a very challenging question about, what the museum can show to people, how much, a lot of things supposed to be kind of taboo or invisible, it's exposed to the public eyes. And I think that somehow provoked a new reading of artistic work. Just like the Zaha Hadid building somehow doesn't have, basically there's no straight walls, so we have to hang the paintings in the floating situation. So I think there's interesting kind of similarity in terms of this provocation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of I got to learn in making the work and to work with many collaborators on the work. So going to Bahia, where I first saw this staircase, which is behind me, and being able to go into Bahian culture, because of course, we all know about Sesqui Pompeia. We have an image here of Sesqui Pompeia. That is the sort of iconic Lina Bo Bardi. I mean, in a way, it's a utopian museum art space where you can have lots of different activities all at once, dance, theatre, music, sports, art exhibitions, so it's a utopia for me in this kind of brutalist architecture. But I think what you get in a sense in Bahia is the other story, is the verso. Like, as you said, easels, we have the presentation of paintings and we see the back of the works, and I think this question of looking at sort of modernity or modernism from another angle was what I found in Bahia, working and collaborating with many sort of Black organizations who've all been inspired by Lina Bo Bardi, but they're not necessarily in a way part of the kind of narrative or the main narrative. Although I think for Bo Bardi, they were actually, I think those influences were really important and made her architecture very unique. And I think also it's interesting when you get like someone who is a foreigner, so to speak, like Zaha was to a certain extent,
yes,
kind of contribution that she was making to architecture, European design, that she led the way to a certain extent. That one in all cultures need voices from the outside, where you need a kind of critical distance to enrich and move forward in a culture. And I think that Bardi's example of the work that she did, where she became known really as an Italian-Brazilian modernist, in a similar way to Zaha, who was like one of the leading British architects. You know, that contribution I think is really significant, and I think marries the two projects and ambitions in terms of the ways in which I think we can look at these contributions, as opposed to, you know, the rather narrow way that these things tend to be looked at generally.
Yeah. Fantastic. Actually, you know, our museum team is also working on a project that coming up next year about women architects, and it's going to be, it's going to be really very interesting. So I give you a little bit a taste before the, you know, little bit, you know, how to say, a sip of something, right? And in the meantime, Isaac, I think also you are, as an artist, your background, somehow you like it or not, but you know, being a artist born in the UK, but from a Jamaican family, let's say. Yeah. Sorry.
Solution.
And all this actually brings you back to another part of the continent. I mean, another continent, which is also somehow your continent, in the sense that, you know, there's some kind of a cultural root, if one can say. On the other hand, I think Lina Bo Bardi's work, it's not only a challenge to, you know, modernist architecture, but also reflect a lot of, you know, engagement with the multicultural situation, the multicultural society of Brazil, that has been very much, you know, reflected in her thinking about architecture, and also in your film. In your film, there's many scenes that she encountered the history of Brazil through the history of the immigrants or the Black community, the native communities, and then also in Bahia, the dance, incredibly beautiful dance, you know, and also somehow they play a role as a kind of resistance voice against the dictatorships when, you know, there was the coming of the military coup and so on. And so in different moments, she also, you know, played a very important role as a resistant voice. And I guess, you know, in your film, one can really feel this embracement of this important history.
Yes, I mean, I think the thing was, for me, you know, when I was making the work and realizing, you know, that one of the reasons why, you know, that Lina Bo Bardi, you know, left Rome, was because after the Second World War, she realized that she wasn't really going to be able to build. And I think in a way, it was precisely that question of her experience of the war and of fascism. She went to Brazil and encountered another kind of fascism that she basically knew that it would be important to resist. And I think this question of resistance in Bo Bardi and in Lina Bo Bardi's work is really important in terms of the way that she did embrace indigenous cultures and Afro-Brazilian cultures, because in a sense, I mean, most of the Brazilian population, let's call it the colonial population, you know, they were the migrants or immigrants, really. And they had been successful because of their colonializing violence, which they had used in terms of, you know, trying to eradicate indigenous cultures and making slaves of Africans. But I think, you know, that in a way, the kind of organic aspect of Brazilian culture was the thing that she recognized and she was bringing out in her architectural work, fused, of course, with her concerns for design as an Italian modernist. And I think there's a way in which, when one thinks about Brazil today, you know, the kind of, if you like, inheritance or legacy of that is something that's still being painfully worked through. So I think in the work, I wanted to also kind of make Lina Bo Bardi resonate for today. You know, why would we have Lina Bo Bardi today? What does it mean? And so in these collaborations in making the work with all the various sort of art companies which I worked with, you know, in Bahia, and also the collaborations with the museums. There is obviously Maspi Museum. There's the wonderful scene at the end with Celso, the theatre director, and Fernanda Montenegro, who needs no introduction. She's one of the most famous actors in Brazil, along with her daughter, Fernanda Montenegro, an Oscar-nominated actress, along with her daughter, Fernanda Torres, a Cannes-winning actress. I mean, they, you know, were so passionate in their collaboration in representing a younger and mature Lina Bo Bardi, dialoguing as mother and daughter. When we get to this scene at the end with Celso in Lina Bo Bardi's last building, Officina, it really resonates, this dialogue where we begin to have them explain, you know, how Lina Bo Bardi would have articulated a marvelous entanglement. And obviously at the end of the work, we have this intimate portrait because Celso, the director of the Officina Theatre, knew Lina Bo Bardi very well. And unfortunately, you know, this wonderful theatre, which is the last building of Lina Bo Bardi, is under threat at the moment. So it's terrible that it's under threat. And Celso is having to fight for his life for that building, because what, of course, corporate industrialists want to do in terms of maybe even knocking the building down. It's really, really unbelievable.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is, you know, happens not only in Brazil, but in many other places, that the cultural community, you know, has to face a lot of, not only the challenge of you know, other difficulties, but also very directly confronting with this contradiction of so-called cultural industry itself, meaning that, you know, theaters, museums, public galleries, and so on, have to be integrated into, you know, this process of capitalist development. Let's say, very often, you know, involved with this gentrification process that sacrifice a lot of cultural heritage and so on. So, and I think, you know, Isaac, also in your work, there's always a kind of critical thinking about this reality. And I remember, you know, a few years ago in Venice Biennale, you actually came up with the film about capital, having you know, a not only major scholars coming to read and discuss Capital, the book by Karl Marx, but also, you know, involving the public voices in the lectures, in the discussions, and then you produced other films related to this question. And how do you see, in this perspective, your Lina Bo Bardi project can make a particular sense in this conversation?
Well, I think we all know you can't produce museums or buildings without capital. And in the film itself, there's a whole debate that takes place in Maspi, where there's a discussion or manifesto which is performed by Fernando Montenegro, Fernando Torres, as mature Lina Bo Bardi and young Lina Bo Bardi, and we call this section "What is a Museum?" And basically, she talks about the museum as this place which is very ambivalently viewed by capital, by corporate interests. It's seen as an intellectual luxury, but not important. It's not going to produce capital. I think, in a way, the relationship, I would say, between the kind of performance of Das Kapital, where I was invited by the great late Queen Wezo, who saw my film on Capital, where I had Stuart Hall and David Harvey. Stuart Hall, the great cultural theorist, and David Harvey, the Marxist geographer, were sort of in discussion along with lots of other people around the meaning of capital. And I think, that we all came out of the crisis in 2008 posing these questions. And I think there's a way in which, if we think about the ways in which, capital now is yet again a question in our current crisis, we'll start to see, what is the priority in relationship to where culture figures in these debates. I think there's a way in which, I'm really interested in the kind of what I would call the philosophers of modernism, that Marx is one of them. I would say that Lina Bo Bardi is another. Frantz Fanon was another. They're all, in a way, trying to pose those difficult questions that I think we need to view as a society, as mature societies, as sophisticated societies, which, have come about through accumulation of capital, but then, how we respond to those questions, I think, is, pretty important, So let's just say that the British response to it in relationship to Brexit perhaps might not be a very smart one at this time. And, you could say that, all of those responses and the way that neoliberalism, that unthinking neoliberalism and the way that that's affected cultures globally, where, in Brazil, you have, the terrible, terrible president now who is, very Trumpian, my experience here in America with Trump. I mean, are these the solutions to late capital, really? So I think, it's a very interesting moment, is Brexit the solution, really? So, is it the fact that we have, the chant that the English were making was like, we want our country back. Really, is that kind of, is that where we need to be? Is this the solution for thinking about capital, or the solution to thinking about questions of cultural difference or migration? I think there's a way in which, we know that capital, that bodies flow in the line of capital, and so I think all of these things also are connected to ideas as well. Although people would not like to admit it, they also flow in relationship to capital, but I think to different ends. And, I think as an architect that you have to think through these questions about where capital investment in a building is going to go and how best articulated is it. And I've never seen a better example of that than in, say, a building like Sesky Pompeia, where you have this kind of incredible different groups of people that utilize that building. So she designed so people could utilize the building. Very pragmatic, almost functionalist, but then at the same time, the question of design is part of the way in which the capital has been used in the building, and I think, that's important, and I could connect the same question to my projects, because my projects are not cheap, unfortunately. So, I mean, there's no sense in the use of the works in terms of how they've been made if I look at it through the lens of capital, because I see them as cultural contributions, essentially. And so I think I'm hoping that these things can add something to our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, talking about critique, talking about, very, let's say, serious questions, but in the meantime, in your work, there's always something dominant, which is beauty, which is always, let's say, very sophisticated, shot and shown as a video installation, and with incredibly beautiful music, dance, metaphoric kind of, allegories, and so on. And Isaac, a question for you. What is beauty?
Wow, what is beauty? Well, I think beauty is different for different people who view, and their different histories. I mean, I know that Rome is an incredibly beautiful city, and when I lived in it, I thought, well, London is not like Rome, so, but then at the same time, I think, that I guess I got to appreciate the kind of, let's say in a city like London, the sort of different histories and the different, if you like, examples of modernity, that the kind of architecture can represent to one. And in that way, the kind of idiosyncratic aspect of buildings, and the kind of, if you like, the jumbled mess of them, also give a certain beauty. And I think in Bo Bardi, perhaps one of the things I sort of learned to appreciate is, let's call it the rough with the smooth, So there's a way in which you'll have, the staircase behind, which is taken from an ox and cart motif, natural kind of wood, but this very elegant way of design, even if the staircase actually might be quite tricky to walk up and down, I think this might be something that she shares with Zaha, Yes.
Well, when you come to the Maxi, be careful. It's perfect for skiing.
So, but I think this aspect is important. But I think also the other thing around the question of sort of beauty is really the fact that, in a hierarchical sense, different groups, have a different access to it, or you could say different things that they can take for granted. But I think one of the main things really is it's really interesting, because I think this question, has really only come up, really, I would say, predominantly from, people who are not usually looking like me. Usually, people who don't look like me, they bring that question up, and I think that's very revealing around the question of beauty. But I mean, I know one of the things for Bo Bardi that she hated things which looked too beautiful.
I love this. Yeah,
there was a rejection, and she wanted that kind of brutalist architecture to kind of show its own beauty, so to speak. And I think, that's one of the things that you really appreciate, or what I love making the work. And I hope, makes you think again,
In spite of that, I think this is the most beautiful statement. So to end this talk tonight, because I think this is the most interesting thing that, and our work can contribute to our minds or our taste. It's telling about being brutal in the most beautiful language.
Yeah.
So, Isaac, thank you so much, and we are very much looking forward to having you here. And
both Mark and I can't wait to come.
Yes, so welcome you both, and I'm sure you're going to give us even more fantastic ideas. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Hanru. I'm in the middle of my class, but great to see you.
So you guys are welcome to the Maxi as soon as possible.
Yes.
And while waiting, enjoy the sunshine in California.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I know.